Welcome. What you are about to watch was made from photographs I took myself. The film runs 26 minutes and 22 seconds. Enjoy. One day behind the crimson walls. The Meridian Gate falls behind, and suddenly the Forbidden City opens. Cobblestones worn smooth by 6 centuries of footsteps spread outward beneath a pale winter sky, and a river of visitors pours through, bundled in padded coats and scarves against the December chill. The golden glazed tiles of the outer halls catch the midday sun, each ridge crowned with a row of ceramic guardian figures too small to see from here but always watching. For nearly 500 years, from the Ming dynasty's Yongle emperor in 1420 to the abdication of the last Qing sovereign in 1912, this was the center of the known world. Today the visitor steps into that current, carried forward by curiosity and the simple weight of so much accumulated time. A few steps further and the scale becomes real. The courtyard stretches wide enough to hold an entire village, its gray brick pavement reflecting the low December light. Some visitors wear contemporary winter jackets. Others have chosen hanfu, the flowing robes of classical China, their silk sleeves trailing behind them like brushstrokes on the stone. The contrast is deliberate and beautiful, a generation reclaiming its own aesthetic heritage inside the very walls where that heritage was forged. Red walls rise on every side, their pigment mixed centuries ago from iron oxide and tung oil, a recipe so durable it still burns against the winter blue. In the foreground, a young figure sits cross-legged on the granite slabs, eyes fixed on a phone screen, perhaps checking a map, perhaps posting a photograph that will be seen 10,000 kilometers away before the next heartbeat. Around this still point the crowd circulates, visitors in embroidered hanfu posing beneath the upturned eaves, children tugging at their parents' hands, cameras raised like offerings to the sky. The Forbidden City contains 9,999 rooms, according to legend, one fewer than the Heavenly Palace, because even an emperor knew when to show restraint. The crowd thickens as the path narrows toward the heart of the complex. Children ride on shoulders for a better view. The stone slabs underfoot, each one quarried from Fengshan district southwest of Beijing and dragged here on roads made slippery with poured water in the dead of winter, form a surface so precisely fitted that 600 years of rain have barely shifted the seams. Ahead, the golden roofs of the Hall of Supreme Harmony rise above the red walls, the largest surviving wooden structure of imperial China, where coronations and the announcement of war once echoed across this very courtyard. From the square, the modern skyline of Beijing ghosts into view beyond the palace walls, glass towers and construction cranes shimmering in the haze. The juxtaposition is startling. The Forbidden City sits at the exact geographic center of old Beijing, the axis around which the entire capital was oriented, and it still holds its ground against everything that has grown up around it. The visitor pauses, turns slowly, and for a moment the centuries compress into a single frame, imperial grandeur in the foreground, the 21st century just behind. And then the Hall of Supreme Harmony. Stone balustrades carved from white marble line the ascending terraces, each post topped with a dragon or a phoenix, their surfaces still sharp after centuries of wind and ice. The visitors climb slowly, winter jackets zipped to the chin, breath visible in the cold air. This hall sits on a 3-tiered platform of marble that stretches across more than 2,000 square meters, designed so that anyone approaching would feel smaller with every step. It worked then. It still works now. The golden roof blazes overhead, its tiles numbered in the tens of thousands, each one glazed with a formula that has never been published. The visitor reaches the top terrace and stops. Below, the courtyard spreads like an ocean of gray stone, and the sense of human ambition compressed into architecture becomes almost overwhelming. From the blinding daylight outside, the visitor steps into the hush of a museum gallery. The temperature drops. The noise fades. Against a smooth gray backdrop, a row of Neolithic earthenware pots sits under soft artificial light, coiled vessels, painted bowls with geometric zigzag patterns, rough surface storage jars with pinched rims. These are among the oldest objects in the Palace Museum's collection, some dating back 5,000 or 6,000 years, long before any emperor imagined these walls. The simplicity of their forms feels almost radical after the excess of the courtyards outside. A round bowl no larger than 2 cupped hands carries a pattern of concentric spirals so precise it could be mistaken for machine work. It is not. It is the steadiness of a single human hand, working in a world that had not yet invented the wheel. In the next case, the centuries leap forward. A Tang Dynasty tomb guardian stands alert, a fierce humanoid figure in elaborate armor of green, ochre, and brown glaze, one foot planted on the back of a snarling lion. These sankai, or three-color glazed figures, were buried with the dead to protect them in the afterlife. Beside it, a pair of ceramic horses stands at attention, their saddles detailed down to individual buckles. The craftsmanship is so confident it borders on swagger. The Tang dynasty, which ruled from the 7th to the 10th century, presided over one of the most cosmopolitan eras in Chinese history, when Chang'an was the largest city on earth and the Silk Road brought Persian glass and Indian spices to its markets. Two Bactrian camels stand next in line, their humps loaded with bundles and miniature riders, their legs braced as if still crossing a desert that vanished 1,000 years ago. The glaze is a muted palette of olive green and sandy brown, faithful to the dusty reality of the caravan routes. One camel carries a small musician perched between its humps, mouth open in a frozen song. These figures were not decorative, they were practical theology, provisions for the journey after death, and their detail tells us exactly what the living valued most: trade, movement, music, the open road. The gallery shifts forward again, and now the cases glow with the confidence of Ming Dynasty porcelain. Vases and jars crowd the shelves, cobalt blue dragons chasing flaming pearls across white bodies, a covered jar in deep copper red with lotus scrolls so fine they seem painted with a single hair, a turquoise-glazed vessel with swirling cloud patterns that catch the gallery light and throw it back as something almost liquid. Each piece represents a technology so advanced that European potters spent centuries trying and failing to replicate it. The secret was kaolin clay, fired at temperatures above 1200 degrees Celsius in the imperial kilns at Jingdezhen, a city that produced porcelain for the court and for export across the known world. The visitor emerges into a larger hall where the ceiling itself becomes the exhibit. Massive wooden beams, painted in deep vermilion and edged with blue and gold cloud motifs, span the space overhead. Crimson pillars anchor each corner, their surfaces lacquered so many times over the centuries that the wood beneath has become almost fossilized. Visitors in hanfu and visitors in down jackets drift along the white display walls, reading multilingual labels, bending close to glass cases. Diffused daylight pours through tall windows, and the hall feels less like a museum than like the living room of a civilization that never stopped adding to its collection. A porcelain sculpture stops the visitor mid-stride. A serene bodhisattva figure, robed in flowing garments and holding a single lotus blossom, sits atop an elaborately modeled lion whose mane curls in tight ceramic spirals. The colors are extraordinary: turquoise, ochre, cream, and a deep aubergine that borders on black. The piece dates from the Qing dynasty, and its combination of Buddhist iconography with virtuoso ceramic technique represents the summit of a tradition that had been refining itself for over 1,000 years. The lion's expression is somewhere between ferocious and amused. The bodhisattva above looks entirely unbothered. Together they suggest a theology in which compassion and power are not opposites but collaborators. The next room feels different. The walls deepen to a rich oxblood red, and the lighting drops to an intimate warmth. A polished wooden table holds porcelain bowls and vessels arranged with a precision that suggests they have not been moved since the day they were placed there. Behind them, a set of painted folding screens depicts mountains dissolving into mist, pine trees clinging to impossible cliffs. A framed portrait of a figure in elaborate court dress hangs on the wall, perhaps a consort, perhaps an empress, the label too distant to read. The atmosphere shifts from public exhibition to private chamber, as if the visitor has accidentally wandered into someone's personal quarters and found them exactly as they were left, 3 centuries ago. Back outside, the cold air sharpens everything. A secondary hall presents itself, smaller than the great audience chambers, but no less ornate. The eaves are painted in alternating bands of blue, green, and gold, each bracket carved with stylized lotus petals. The red walls, seen up close, reveal brushstrokes in the lacquer, evidence of the human hand behind all this imperial precision. Carved wooden panels line the facade, their geometric lattice patterns designed not only for beauty but for ventilation in the humid Beijing summers. Even the functional was made beautiful. Especially the functional. The path curves into the imperial garden, and the atmosphere changes completely. Chinese pines and ancient cypresses, their trunks twisted by centuries of wind, rise from beds of gray stone. The ground is paved with a mosaic of pebbles arranged in patterns: cranes, deer, flowers, each stone selected by color and pressed into mortar by hand. The crowds thin here. Voices drop. A few visitors in traditional robes stand beneath a pine whose lowest branch extends horizontally for nearly 4 meters, propped up by a wooden crutch placed there decades ago by a gardener who refused to let it fall. The garden was designed as a private retreat for the imperial family, a place where even an emperor could pretend, for an hour, that the world outside the walls had stopped asking things of him. A marble bridge arches over one of the inner golden water channels, its balustrades carved with clouds and dragons, the stone pale against the deep red of the gateway beyond. A solitary figure in a dark jacket crosses toward the entrance, dwarfed by the scale of the gate behind, a gate that was once reserved for the emperor alone. The bridge stones are worn in the center, polished by millions of passing feet into a surface as smooth as river glass. There is something deeply moving about stone that has been softened not by water but by human passage, each footstep removing a layer too thin to measure and yet, over centuries, enough to change the shape of the world. Late afternoon light begins to stretch the shadows across the stone courtyard as the visitor moves deeper into the inner precincts. The golden tiles seem to warm from within, absorbing the low sun and radiating it back as a soft amber glow. Visitors of all ages scatter across the gray granite, some photographing the sweeping rooflines, others simply standing still and looking up. The Forbidden City covers 72 hectares and contains roughly 980 surviving structures. To walk it all in a single day is possible. To see it all is not. The architecture reveals itself in layers, a carved dragon here, a painted cloud there, and the visitor begins to understand that the entire complex was designed not to be comprehended at a glance but to unfold slowly, like a scroll. A wooden boardwalk channels the flow of visitors past a row of secondary halls, their crimson walls and orange-tiled roofs repeating the color palette of the outer court but at a more intimate scale. Some visitors pause at the stone railings to look down into sunken courtyards below. Others walk with their eyes on their screens, documenting every step. Figures in hanfu glide past figures in puffer jackets, and neither group finds the other remarkable. This, perhaps, is the Forbidden City's greatest trick. It makes the coexistence of 5 centuries feel ordinary. Another grand hall rises ahead, its tiered golden roof supported by massive red columns that taper slightly toward the top, a structural technique that gives the building an illusion of even greater height. The clay tiles on the roof were fired in kilns outside Beijing and transported by barge along canals that no longer exist. Each tile was stamped with a date and the name of the artisan who made it, an early form of quality control, but also, inadvertently, a record of individual lives. The courtyard before it is paved in stone so uniformly gray it seems to absorb sound itself, and the visitor notices, perhaps for the first time, how quiet it has become despite the hundreds of people present. The sun is lower now, and the crimson walls have deepened to the color of aged wine. Shadows reach across the courtyard like long fingers. The crowd has thinned. Late afternoon visitors tend to be the ones who came not for photographs but for something harder to name. A group clusters near a doorway, peering inside at a room they cannot enter. Another family sits on the stone steps, a child asleep in a parent's arms, exhausted by the sheer volume of history encountered in a single afternoon. The yellow tiles overhead burn in the last strong light of the day, and for a moment the entire complex seems less like a museum and more like a living organism, breathing slowly, indifferent to the passage of any individual hour. Inside the clock gallery, the visitor enters a different century entirely. A golden automaton clock, shaped like a miniature Gothic tower complete with tiny arched windows and a spire, stands under glass against a backdrop of engraved architectural drawings. The clock was likely a diplomatic gift from a European court. The Qing emperors were famously fascinated by Western horology, and by the 18th century the Forbidden City housed one of the largest collections of mechanical clocks in the world. The face is decorated with Roman numerals, its hands frozen at an hour that no longer matters. What matters is the object itself, a conversation between civilizations, carried out in gears and gold leaf. Beside the clock, a display recreates an imperial tea setting, a table and 2 chairs of lacquered hardwood, their surfaces inlaid with floral motifs in mother-of-pearl and brass. On the tabletop sit porcelain teacups, a small teapot, and a slender vase holding dried flowers. The arrangement is so precise, so deliberate, that it feels less like a museum reconstruction and more like an interruption, as if the tea drinkers left only moments ago and might return at any second. The chairs, with their curved backs and cushioned seats, suggest that even in the most powerful court in Asia, someone understood that comfort was not a weakness but a form of attention. Another clock, and another aesthetic vocabulary. This one is pure Rococo. Porcelain cherubs with gilded wings perch among porcelain roses in pastel pink and green, their petals so thin they seem translucent. The clock face, framed in scrollwork, displays Roman numerals beneath a crown of ceramic flowers. The base is polished walnut, its curves echoing the organic forms above. This is likely a French piece from the mid-18th century, one of dozens sent to the Qianlong Emperor, who was said to spend hours watching their mechanisms unfold. In the dim light of the gallery, the clock glows like a small altar to the idea that beauty and engineering are the same discipline practiced at different scales. The most spectacular piece in the gallery is also the strangest. A gilded elephant, its body covered in hammered gold and studded with semi-precious stones, stands harnessed to an ornate carriage populated by tiny warrior figures no larger than a thumb. The craftsmanship is so fine that individual reins are visible between the elephant's tusks and the carriage shafts. A few visitors stand before it with mouths slightly open, their reflections ghosting in the glass. The piece is believed to be an 18th century British creation, designed specifically for the Chinese market, a product of a world in which European artisans studied Chinese taste with the same intensity that Chinese scholars studied European mechanics. The visitor moves into a gallery where the walls are painted a deep ceremonial red, and the objects on display shift from European imports back to Chinese originals. A multi-tiered wooden pagoda model, no more than a meter tall but carved with a precision that suggests it was a rehearsal for the real thing, occupies one case. Opposite it, a gilded ceremonial cabinet displays dragons and phoenixes in raised relief. Between them, a dark wooden console table supports a framed landscape painting, mountains receding into inkwash mist, a solitary pine on a cliff edge. The juxtaposition is deliberate, the three-dimensional and the two-dimensional, the architectural and the painterly, all of it produced by a civilization that saw no meaningful boundary between craft and art. Outside again. A queue forms at the entrance to one of the inner palace halls, visitors' breath rising in small clouds against the cold air. The gateway above them is a riot of colored golden dragons writhing across crimson panels, floral scrollwork in blue and green framing every beam. A sign in Chinese characters identifies the hall, though from this angle the name is partially obscured by the crowd. Children bounce on their heels, impatient. Adults crane their necks. The anticipation is palpable, the kind of collective excitement that only a truly exceptional space can generate, the knowledge that whatever lies beyond the doorway has been drawing people toward it for half a millennium. And then the Nine-Dragon Wall. 29 meters long and nearly 4 meters high, it erupts from the gray courtyard like a wave of color frozen mid-crest. 9 dragons, each rendered in raised relief from blazed ceramic tiles, twist and coil across its surface, turquoise, gold, deep imperial purple, cream, and green. They chase flaming pearls through stylized clouds, their claws extended, their bodies undulating with a force that seems barely contained by the wall itself. Built in 1771 during the reign of the Qianlong Emperor, this is one of only 3 such walls surviving in China. One of the original tiles, damaged and secretly replaced with a carved wooden replica during a restoration, went undetected for over 200 years before a fire revealed the substitution. Even in perfection, there is always one hidden human compromise. The visitor stands close enough to see the individual glaze drips on the dragon's scales. This is not decoration. This is a statement of cosmic power rendered in clay and fire. Beyond the dragon wall, the architecture becomes more refined, more private. A smaller hall presents its facade, deep red walls with elaborate floral panels in green and gold, a roof of glazed tiles with upturned eaves so sharply curved they seem to defy the weight they carry. A marble balustrade runs along the front terrace, its posts crowned with stone lions whose expressions hover somewhere between vigilance and boredom. These inner halls were the domain of the empress and the imperial consorts, spaces where the political theater of the outer court gave way to the more complex theater of domestic life. Every door, every screen, every garden rock was placed according to principles of feng shui that govern not just aesthetics but the flow of energy through the imperial body itself. The visitor climbs a short flight of marble steps and turns to look back. The view is breathtaking, a cascade of golden roofs receding toward the south, each one slightly lower than the last, the entire complex stepping down from the emperor's private quarters to the public courtyards like a mountain range made of timber and tile. White marble balustrades line every terrace, their surfaces carved with phoenixes and cloud motifs. Below, visitors move in small groups across the stone plaza, their scale dwarfed by the architecture, their bright clothing the only color against the gray. The layout was not accidental. The Forbidden City was designed to be experienced from this direction, from the inside looking out, because the emperor's perspective was the only one that mattered. Through a narrow doorway, the visitor glimpses a room that feels more like a meditation than a space. Golden silk cushions sit on a tufted floor mat. Latticework lanterns hang from a dark wooden ceiling. Against the far wall, a large painting depicts a scene of quiet domesticity: furniture, scholars' objects, a landscape beyond a window. The room is designed for sitting, for tea, for conversation conducted at a volume just above silence. There is no throne here, no dragon, no assertion of power. Only the careful arrangement of beautiful things in a space small enough to feel human. It is, perhaps, the most moving room in the entire Forbidden City, the place where someone who controlled an empire came to remember what it felt like to simply be a person. In a nearby gallery, a single object holds the visitor in place. A deep blue porcelain bowl, its surface painted with intricate scrollwork in white, holds an arrangement of artificial flowers: roses in deep crimson and pale white, dark green leaves, each petal formed from thin sheets of tinted material that mimic the texture of living flora. The piece dates from the Qing dynasty, sometime between 1644 and 1911, and it represents an art form that has largely disappeared, the creation of permanent botanical arrangements so convincing that only touch could distinguish them from the real thing. In a palace where fresh flowers were available every day of the year, someone still chose to make flowers that would never wilt. The impulse to stop time is older than any clock. The visitor enters one of the great throne halls, and the scale shifts again. The ceiling soars upward into a coffered vault of carved and painted wood, its central panel depicting a coiled dragon clutching a pearl. Below, the imperial throne sits on an elevated dais, flanked by incense burners in the shape of elephants, their bronze surfaces darkened by centuries of smoke. The throne itself is surprisingly modest in size: a single seat of carved and gilded wood, its back panel inscribed with Chinese characters. The power of the room lies not in the throne but in everything that surrounds it: the murals, the columns, the vast empty space that separates the ruler from everyone else. Distance, it turns out, was the ultimate symbol of authority. Another chamber, smaller and more intimate. Shelves line the walls, stacked with blue and white ceramic vases, carved jade pieces, and scholars' objects whose specific functions are no longer entirely clear. A throne-like seat in the center, gilded and cushioned, faces a wall of dark wooden paneling carved with longevity symbols. The red walls press inward, and the room feels warm despite the winter cold, as if the lacquer and silk and wood have been absorbing body heat for 300 years and are only now beginning to release it. This was a space for reading, for calligraphy, for the private exercise of a mind trained since childhood to govern. Outside again, and the December light has taken on the amber tone of late afternoon. A smaller pavilion rises from a paved courtyard, its tiered roof a cascade of red tiles and gilded ridge ornaments. The walls glow deep red and gold against the deepening blue of the sky. An intricately carved stone railing encircles the structure, its balusters shaped like elongated lotus buds. No trees, no vegetation, just stone and wood and tile, arranged with a precision that makes the absence of nature feel intentional. The pavilion was not meant to compete with the garden. It was meant to be the garden's opposite, a place where geometry replaced growth, or order replaced the beautiful chaos of the living world. The visitor looks up, and the architecture reveals its finest details. Beneath the eaves, wooden brackets interlock in a system so complex it functions as both structure and ornament, each bracket supporting the weight of the roof while simultaneously forming a decorative pattern of layered curves. Carved mythical beasts peer down from the beam ends, their painted surfaces faded by sun and rain but still legible. The red latticework windows, each one composed of dozens of interlocking wooden pieces fitted without nails, filter the light into geometric patterns on the stone floor below. This is architecture as language, every element carrying meaning, every joint telling a story about the relationship between heaven and earth. The Chang'an Pavilion, the grand theater of the Forbidden City, opens before the visitor like a jewel box. 3 stories of stage rise within an enclosed hall, the ceiling painted with a kaleidoscope of floral and cloud motifs in blue, green, red, and gold. The polished wooden stage floor reflects the painted ceiling like a dark mirror. This theater was built for the Qianlong Emperor, who commissioned more than 1,000 opera performances during his 60-year reign. Trapdoors in the stage floor and ceiling allowed actors to appear and vanish as if by magic, descending from heaven or rising from the underworld. The space is silent now. No audience, no performers, no music. But the architecture still resonates with the memory of sound, as if the walls themselves have not yet finished listening. The last of the interior spaces. A carpet woven in deep reds and golds covers the floor of what appears to be an imperial bedchamber. Dark lacquered wood panels line the walls, their surfaces carved with symbols of longevity: cranes, pine branches, the character for 10,000 years. A throne-like daybed occupies the center, its cushions still indented as if someone rose only recently. Gilded vases stand in the corners on carved pedestals, catching what remains of the afternoon light filtering through the lattice screens. The room is intimate, almost claustrophobic after the vast courtyards outside, and the visitor feels the strange weight of standing in a space where someone once slept, dreamed, and woke to the burden of ruling a quarter of the world's population. The final room is small and golden. Wooden screens with geometric fretwork filter the last daylight into a lattice of soft lines across the floor. A gilded seat faces the screens, its back to the viewer, as if whoever sat here preferred to look outward rather than be looked at. The carved panels glow in shades of amber and deep brown, their surfaces telling stories in a language of symbols that has outlasted every emperor who commissioned them. The visitor stands at the threshold and does not enter. Some rooms ask to be observed, not occupied. Outside, the December sun is already sliding behind the western walls of the Forbidden City, turning the golden roofs to copper, and the shadows of 600 years are stretching across the stone. The day is ending. But the palace, as always, is simply waiting for the next one to begin. Thank you for watching. May there be many more journeys ahead, and many more moments worth keeping.